It's also important to understand the high ability assessments. In the past, students have typically taken NWEA, the Northwest Evaluation Association, test as an entry point into high ability testing, which has historically eliminated many high ability students, as noted by teachers and principals who have discovered that many high ability students are left out of programming at the start of a new school year. This year, we have increased access by providing the COGAT to all second as well as fifth grade students. And that is also a directive that our state, the Indiana Department of Education, is also taking in order to increase access. However, I will share that in the context of COVID-19, we did not see the benefits of this change as anticipated. In general, performance levels across the board were relatively lower this year. And we had many families who opted out of testing opportunities in general due to fear of exposure to COVID-19. So it was challenging to measure impact this particular school year. However, we'll continue to measure the impact of increasing access in years to come. In the future, we're also looking to implement the Naglieri test, which is another high ability assessment. So for students who may not qualify the first round through the COGAT assessment, rather than offering another performance-based test, we are going to offer another high ability measure because it's important to ensure that we are offering assessments that are measuring the aptitude and the potential for high ability identification. So there should be more information to come, but I wanted to ensure that families had an understanding of the assessments. And of course, we do take into consideration, as a part of having multiple data points, historical data, including common assessments that students take within school. We take into consideration recommendations. We look at work ethic and how students are able to manage their workload within school. So there are many other factors that do go into the assessment and the identification of high ability students. However, I want to highlight some of the main assessments that are taken that have science and normative measures that qualify high ability learners. So as mentioned before, students had to take the NWEA assessment in order to have an entry point into high ability testing, such as the COGAT. But we've been able to change that structure and we'll continue to look at how we identify students in the future. And that includes with our honors courses. In the past for honors, we looked at COGAT assessment, as well as various placement tests in order for students to have access into honors math or English courses. However, this year we added a student component to that. We added a student application process because we wanted to honor students' voices and understand their interests and their passions for participating within those particular courses. So they were able to complete rating scales. They had various short answer and essays, and we had a team of department chair leaders, teachers who review that in such a comprehensive way to determine students who are able to be a part of that programming. It's important to have a culture responsive identification process. And the culture responsive process means we are keeping students' strengths, their intellectual capacity, what is needed for success in mind upon the identification process. Therefore, for a culture responsive identification process, we need to consider multiple data points, which is why I wanted to talk about some of the assessments that are used and what we intend to use in the future. Also, to offer multiple entry points into programming. We have to get to a place where we are testing students more than just one time a year. and we're able to add access into programming through multiple times of assessments. Also have rigorous curriculum. If students are exposed to rigorous curriculum early on, it certainly helps with the identification process. And so we're looking into all of this research as a broad-based planning committee. And this committee is one that I inherited coming into this district that has been around historically throughout Washington Township. But we are shifting in a direction where we are intentionally being grounded in research. We're listening to what experts are telling us on a national level. We're really thinking about the ways we identify students. We're thinking about our service models. So in the future, I know there have been a lot of questions families have posed where they have asked, well, what does that mean for my student for delivery of service in the future? And we're going to have to continue to assess and monitor that. It could mean that we will look into more clustering options, and you'll learn more about clustering through Dr. Dina Brulles, who will talk in a little bit. Or it could mean that we keep a combination of some service options, depending on what works best for particular schools, and of course, looking at resources, staffing, and so forth. And so there could be a combination. And many districts across the country, from my own personal research, are moving into various models where they may have a variance in the way students are serviced, but ultimately they're still servicing all students at all sites. Avon Schools is one that actually does that here locally. And so we are looking to increase access. We're looking to ensure that our systems are equitable, and it will take time, to do that. So as mentioned, the Broad-Based Planning Committee has conducted variety of audits. And this is an audit that was conducted in 2019. I have presented some of the findings within the school board meetings that have occurred this past semester. However, lack of consistent data points was something that the committee determined. Lack of access, underrepresentation, as we've talked about, and also an unclear as well as inconsistent process. And so we have to ensure that we're working on these measures. And so for me, being new, coming into this role this year, October to be exact, we have really worked hard to increase the access, to increase our communication. So for the first time within this district, we have a high-ability handbook, that we have devised as on our website. It's far from perfect, but we are certainly working to make improvements with suggestions and feedback. So we will continue to revamp that even in this summer to make sure that we are providing clear communication about our processes, our procedures, and what you need to know about high ability learners as well as gifted education. We're also going to continue to look at our 6th and 7th grade application process, for our honors program, and make sure that we are revamping that in ways that ensures equity for our students as well, and giving our counselors the tools that they need to recruit as well as retain our high school students within honors programming, particularly looking at marginalized groups, students of color, where there is underrepresentation. And so we're taking all these things in mind, while working to improve our systems here in Washington Township. Dr. Brulles will talk about the service model, but these are some examples, and you can find many examples of service models if you just do a quick Google search of the Department of Education, the High Ability Coordination Handbook. It has a variety, but we will specifically talk about some of these this evening. And to be very clear as far as what we are offering in terms of our sites, we do have 4 self-contained within our elementary: Allisonville, Crooked Creek, Clearwater, and Box Hill. Middle school honors, we have math, language arts, science, as well as social studies programming. And the clustering models will only occur in Allisonville, 3rd and 4th grade. We had a school principal in particular who believed their staff would be equipped for this particular model in 3rd grade. And then 4th grade, we had to make that change due to a high class size, in order to make the class sizes smaller. Crooked Creek had more of the opposite, more of an underrepresentation in terms of the amount of students who are qualified. And so we made a clustering class for 3rd grade only. And so those are the only sites where clustering is occurring in our district, to be very clear about that. And we're going to monitor that as well as track growth and make sure that teachers are equipped and prepared to have everything they need as they have a full professional development program. And they also have consultants and the support of Dr. Brulles and many other people who will help them in this journey as we continue to implement the structure with fidelity. Schools are also working to strengthen their service options. So we have many students who may test for high ability within this district and decide not to participate in the programming. However, we are still obligated to service them if they identify as high ability. Therefore, schools historically, before the word clustering has emerged more mainstream, have been working on clustering methods, to service students, to make sure that needs are met. However, I will say that there is certainly a difference in our implementation this year because we are moving to a research-based approach. And we're being very conscientious of the compositions of the classes that we are constructing, as well as thinking about the pedagogical practices that are happening within those classrooms. And so I'm not able to speak to the context of what some families may have experienced in the past, but I can tell you moving forward as a researcher, as someone who has studied equitable systems and practices, that there is a science behind the construction of these spaces. And we are working hard with experts to ensure that we are meeting this model with fidelity. And so with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I will take the time to introduce Dr. Dina Brulles. If you're able to turn on your camera and join us, she will begin to talk to us about high ability structures, particularly looking at the clustering model. She is the author of the Clustering Handbook, and we are blessed as a corporation to just have her expertise to help guide us as we move forward in these practices. And so she'll walk you through some understandings of high ability students in general, as well as understanding what does the clustering model look like in action? What does the delivery of service look like for students?
Hear me and see my screen. So today I'm just going to follow up and go a little bit more depth into what Dr. Idar was saying. I'm going to talk a little bit about the learning needs of students through cluster grouping. Now I'm going to be working with a lot of the teachers and the cluster teachers who are going and other teachers who are going to be working with your gifted students. Here are some of the strategies that we're going to be sharing. The instructional strategies are come from several of my books that I have written. So I've done a lot of work with gifted programming methods, and today I'm going to talk very briefly about a few of the gifted children, their learning needs, and then talk a little bit about the cluster grouping model. And here's a few of the outcomes that we can expect when we're cluster grouping. Expanding gifted services, embracing diversity, increasing achievement for all students, raising expectations for all students, because a lot of the teachers are going to be trained in some of these methods. And basically what I have seen is that we end up identifying a lot more of our gifted students than we had in the past once we begin cluster grouping. So when we talk about gifted, let's explore this a little bit and see what this does mean. One of the definitions that I totally appreciate is from Francois Gagne, who says that giftedness designates the possession and use of untrained and spontaneously expressed natural abilities in at least one area. To contrast that, talent, being talented, designates mastery of systematically developed abilities or skills or knowledge in at least one area. So there's a big difference between gifted and talented. Some of the students are gifted and talented, some are just gifted, and some are just talented. So let's think about what that looks like. Well, when I uploaded this, kind of messed up the font, so sorry about that. These are just a few. I'm not going to go through all of this because this is a presentation in and of itself, but I'd like to set the stage because it does impact how our gifted cluster classrooms are constructed. See, these bright children are some like those talented ones that I was talking about. They top of the group, and the gifted students are often beyond the group. understands ideas or constructs abstractions. The bright child knows answers, and the gifted child asks a lot of questions. One of my favorite ones here is that bright children enjoy school, where gifted children enjoy learning. And they have a lot of background knowledge that they bring to the table, that they get excited about learning. And it's not always that they're getting excited about what the teacher's teaching, but just about what's learning. So we want to build on those strengths and build on those interests. One of the things also that you'll see here is that bright children absorb information, gifted children manipulate information. That means they want to try to make sense of the different things that they're hearing and seeing. Bright children are oftentimes very pleased with their own learning, and sometimes gifted children are highly self-critical. As you can see, the gifted learner is a very complex student. So when we're looking at this, how we identify giftedness, many times we look at this bell curve, and this is what the schools consider to be average. 95% of the students are average. Well, when we're looking at gifted students, that's beyond that 95%. This means that we have to do something differently with these students once they are identified and grouped. And I have the pleasure of helping to design some of those workshops and that training that we are going to be providing to teachers in your school district this year. I'll touch upon a few of those after a bit. So when we talk about gifted students, we're really talking about high ability. And high ability, and this talking about general ability, high ability really relates to how students make relationship between ideas and things. They have a lot of background knowledge that they bring to the classroom every day, and so because they have a lot of interests and they're really smart, they draw upon those interests, and so they're constantly making connections through past experiences. We want to build on that with our gifted learners, because that's how they get excited about learning. High ability also means that they learn really quickly and they have great memory, so that they can draw upon some of that past experience and past knowledge and involve it in what they are learning currently. So a lot of this is what we're going to be training the teachers on. That other aspect is that they just learn very quickly, much more quickly than their age peers. That means that they cannot spend as much time. They don't need to spend as much time on some of the curriculum and instruction that the other students need more time to spend learning. So these are just a range of different characteristics that we commonly see with gifted students. Lots of interest, lots of highly developed curiosity. They ask endless questions. They love to experiment and try to do things differently in different ways. You might, if as a parent of a gifted child, you might notice that your young child, even as a young child, would like to take things apart and just to see how they work. And this isn't, if you're a parent of gifted children, you might not know that these are atypical. All of these behaviors are not typical with other age peers. Another thing with gifted students is they have an unusual interest in justice, ethics, morality, a sense of fairness. You might have heard your gifted children say, concern about what's fair. Once again, this is very unique to gifted students in conjunction with some of these other characteristics. But once again, ability to retain a great deal of information allows them to go deeper into their understandings when they are learning in the classroom. And these behaviors really relate to all content areas, everything that the student is learning in school. And speaking of that, what are the learning needs of gifted students? The same as all other students. all students deserve consistent opportunities to learn new material every day they are in school, every year. And that means with our gifted students that we have to do something differently with our curriculum instruction, because like that bell curve you saw, 95% of our students fit in within the low average, average, or high average. But the gifted students fall just outside of that high average, which means that we have to give them continuing opportunities to go deeper into the curriculum, go beyond the grade level curriculum. And that brings us to cluster grouping. When we talk about cluster grouping, we do call it the school-wide cluster grouping model because it does impact the whole school. Because what it does is that all the students are purposely placed into a classroom based on their ability, potential, and achievement. And this allows us to balance off those classrooms so we have high ability and high achieving students in every single classroom. Another component of a broad component of the school-wide cluster grouping model contains critical elements of effective gifted programming. And now these were designed years ago by some of the people that had done a lot of the research behind developing gifted programming. And this model does address all of those important elements. Flexible grouping, we met with teachers today and principals yesterday, and we talked a lot about the need to flexibly group within the classroom so that we make sure that the students are grouped with others that are working on at similar levels. We know that they need differentiated curriculum instruction because once again, they fall outside of that average norm. By continuous progress, this is really important. We're talked about today with the teachers, but we've got a lot of trainings set up going forward to really make sure that the students we're documenting progress. And by that, it means that we have to rely a lot on some pre-testing so that we can compact curriculum so that we can test the kids out of stuff that they already know. So they don't have to spend time learning stuff that others need to spend more time learning. So this is just a continuous progress is a key element when you're teaching gifted students, because you can't assume that they know material. You have to make sure that you can document that with a pre-test and then a post-test. And we talked a lot about that today, but we're going to go into depth on what that looks like in future trainings. Intellectual peer interaction, gifted students need to learn with other gifted students because they challenge each other. They engage in learning when they get excited about what others are doing. And that brings that challenge level to the level that we know that our gifted students need. By continuity, we mean that giftedness doesn't start, giftedness is every single grade level. So what we have to do is continue to group these students together, and we can do that in the cluster grouping model. And the most important thing on this list, I would say, is that we need to have teachers with specialized training. And that's why I'm very impressed by what your district has set up, because they're not only saying we're going to cluster group, but they want to in-depth plan on how to support those teachers so that they can be the most effective in that model. So when we talk about cluster grouping, school-wide cluster grouping model is we group the students who are identified as gifted into a mixed ability classroom with a teacher who is trained to differentiate for those students. I said mixed ability, but what we actually do is we narrow the range. So a lot of the children who are really struggling with grade level will not be with the gifted students. And this frees up the teacher so that she doesn't have both ends of that bell curve, so she can really focus her planning in advance for the group of gifted learners that are in the classroom without having to also try to spend an inordinate amount of time on the super strugglers. So one of the great things about this model that I appreciate a lot is that it enfranchises a lot of gifted students who are typically left out of other traditional gifted programs. And by this, these are just a few of those groups here. So I won't go into depth with them, but what I do, like at the beginning, when I talk about Francois Gagne's definition of gifted, these kids, gifted students have an innate ability. They are born with the potential to learn at very advanced levels. But unless we do something differently with them, they won't develop that potential to the extent that they really can. This is particularly true with some of these groups who are underrepresented in many of our gifted programs. So once we identify that they have that potential, we place them. So they don't have to opt into a gifted program. They don't have to go to another school. They are absolutely grouped together at their school so that every child can receive gifted services in their home schools. So I frequently get asked questions from parents and educators, and I decided to just include just a few of those so that you can wrap your brains around what clustering looks like. And for many, many years in our country, we have been grouping our English language learners together, our special ed students together. Why? Because we have a teacher with specialized training so that they can really develop lessons and provide instruction that's appropriate for those students based on their needs. Well, cluster grouping does exactly the same thing as that, but with gifted students. And that means that that's why I was saying it's so important to continue with ongoing teacher training, because that's what we do with the other special populations. So giftedness is just another special population, like some of those others that we were talking about. Sorry, the spacing kind of got wacky once I projected. So one of the questions is, people will say, why should gifted students be placed in a cluster group instead of evenly assigned to all classes? Like I've been saying, gifted kids really need time learning with peers, with their learning peers. They feel better about themselves and about their learning. And teachers are going to be more likely to differentiate curriculum instruction when there's a group of the students, and when they don't have that full range in the classroom. Sometimes people worry that cluster grouping will rob the other classes of academic leadership. Well, once again, in that chart that I showed you with gifted and bright, we're going to have really bright students, really smart students in both classes, in the gifted and in the opposite, because the gifted identification, those kids, gifted identified students, those kids will be grouped together, but also are going to be grouped together those high achieving students. So every class will have a good balance of academic leaders throughout. Sometimes people will erroneously think that gifted students are great academic leaders, and they're not always that. It's not always that case, because they make intuitive leaps. They get stuff like this a lot of times. They can see things that others may not see as readily. And sometimes it looks like they don't have to work as hard as others do. But one of the other important aspects that we have found in this model is that high average students have new opportunities to become academic leaders. And I have seen all of this. I've been cluster grouping in 2 different districts. My current one has 30 elementary schools, and we cluster group in every single one of them, in my previous district as well. So I've been doing this for about 25 years, just working with gifted programming and supporting teachers. And so a lot of this is not just, what we're thinking might happen. There's a lot of evidence that supports it. So who are we looking for when we're looking for gifted cluster teachers? Well, first of all, we want teachers who really enjoy working with gifted students, who understand their learning needs, who support inclusion. We want teachers who are not going to be teaching to the whole class all of the time. We're going to do some little bit of direct instruction. We're going to assess where they are, meaning pre-assessments, pre-tests, form flexible learning groups, and let the kids work at the levels of challenge where they're at. And also, we want teachers who will encourage a student-centered approach to learning. And by that, I mean student-directed learning. Because before I was mentioning it, these kids have a lot of interest, a lot of background knowledge. We want to build on that, because that is how we can really engage them. So we want teachers who are willing to do this and willing to learn how to do this. And this is built into some of the training that we have prepared for your district's teachers. Another thing that we do with this, and we're already planning these out with your district, is to have these gifted cluster teachers meet together to discuss specific strategies, share lessons and materials and ideas, talk about how to increase some of our identification at the different schools. They get together and they can problem solve if there's something that's going on in their classroom that bounce ideas off each other, because they're going to be the only ones at their school at their grade level. So planning opportunities for these teachers to work together is certainly ideal. And it helps also for them to see how they're documenting academic growth with their students by sharing some of those topics. Now, these are some of the training topics that we have in mind. I won't go through all of them because we wanted to save a few minutes for some questions at the end, but I will just touch upon a few that are really important. I've talked about the need for social emotion for teachers to understand social emotional needs of gifted students. And this is really critical because a lot of teacher training in this country, teachers before they're certified in there's only a handful of states in the country who actually have pre-service training in gifted, meaning that the teachers before they're certified for teachers have background in the coursework in gifted education. That's just not required in most states. So we have to do that once we're from the district if we want to help make sure that they are the best prepared to work with those students. And these are some of the ways that we support those teachers with that. Teach them how to compact curriculum to make room for new curriculum, form flexible learning groups, rely on higher order thinking skills in the classroom. Create and use learning extensions and tiered lessons. By tiered lessons, I mean within one lesson, there's going to be an advanced, an average. There's going to be different levels of work so that students can learn at whatever level is their challenge level. And this is a major part of our training with your teachers. But the other important thing is to use appropriate assessments. And that means what I would keep relying to in some of that pre-testing that we talked about. So in a nutshell, all of those things can be really moved right into these four major instructional strategies that we want to emphasize with cluster teachers. And I've talked a lot about them, but the problem solving and project-based learning, that's a big thing for the gifted students because that's when they have opportunity to delve more deeply into their interests, their background, and bring some of these, their passion projects is what we call them as well. Acceleration, we know that gifted students need acceleration, not 100% of the time, not in all subject areas, but in their areas of strength. So, well, how do we know that, where that area is? Once again, back to a lot of some pre-assessment. And you hear me talking about that, but some of this is very, very informal and the teachers can get it on the go while they're in the class through conversations, through questioning, through some of these types of opportunities. And of course, I keep going back to that. So some of the benefits of cluster grouping is that we're challenging gifted students every day, all day at their home school. And that will really help us diminish the underrepresentation because there's certain students and families who just don't want to travel to another school. And I have found that personally in my own district that we really addressed a lot of those inequities that we see that we typically see in some gifted programs. Creating learning and leadership opportunities for all students, empowering teachers by expanding their awareness and preparation. Once again, there's that ongoing assessment to see where their strengths and needs are. Giving all students opportunities for extended learning, meaning going deeper into the curriculum, training teachers throughout the district, and increasing the gifted population. So I am going to stop sharing right now. And turn it back over to Dr. EBR.
Thank you. And apologize for the glitch earlier. Still not sure how that happened, but stranger things have happened with technology. So I appreciate you, Dr. Brulles, for being here and explaining that. I've been looking at some of the questions that have emerged, and one of the things that I think you can help to answer, Dr. Brulles, would be the difference between self-contained and clustering. From what you've described, there are some participants who are unsure of just the difference, in that. It seems like it's the same thing as a self-contained, and you're just perhaps incorporating more students into it from an inclusion standpoint. Can you expand more on that difference?
Sure. In a self-contained gifted program classroom, every single student in that classroom is typically identified as gifted. And it's usually at one or two sites or a few sites in the district. And so the reason I say that this enfranchises diversity and increases opportunity within the site is because in cluster grouping, when all of the gifted students are grouped into one grade level class, they have those like-minded peers to learn with and learn from, but there are also some other students, average students, that are in the classroom, and so they have multiple opportunities, teachers do, to create their flexible learning groups within the class.
Thank you for that. There's also a question about technology, and we are looking into various forms of technology to aid, of course, with high ability students. But I want to also be very clear that we would not want for high ability students to be dependent on devices. There needs to be direct instruction that is taking place within the classroom environment. There's another question that is asking about clustering and if that is going to replace Compass and if it will also be done earlier than third grade. And I think we have to be very careful about language. I know that Compass has been the name of the high ability program. However, Compass does not equate to high ability services. And so we really need to be clear that what we are talking about in this conversation is how we service high ability learners. And so we really need to think about within even our internal system, utilizing more of the language of high ability services than just saying Compass. So to answer that question, it's not going to replace any type of high ability services. It really is the ways we're going to best meet some of the needs of our students moving forward in order to have more of an inclusive approach and an approach that provides more access to all of our learners. And if it will be done earlier in third grade, is a great question, because we do have to start screening kindergarten students per the Department of Education next year. And so based on the kindergarten screener that we would give at the very end of the school year, we certainly could consider clustering students as early as first grade, just to ensure that needs are met once students are identified.
If you'd like, I can speak a little bit to the question about gifted versus talented.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so someone had asked about, so that you're a parent of gifted and talented, two different students. So am I, so are many, many parents. The purpose of making sure that those talented students are opposite the gifted is so that all classrooms have strong academic leadership. The training that we want to provide is good for all teachers. And that's what I was saying before. Some of the research that we have shows, and I did a study and I've shared it with your district, but maybe you could, that would be something that you would like to take a look at, what we did was we looked at gifted students and non-gifted students in this cluster model. And actually, the non-gifted students made equal academic progress in the cluster model as the gifted students did. However, we also did another study of gifted students that were placed in a cluster and those that were not placed in a cluster. And the difference between the achievement was much higher in the cluster for the gifted students that were in the cluster than those gifted students that were not in a cluster. But when we talk about those high achieving, high ability students, those bright kids that I put on that chart, those students are the ones that are taking the grade level curriculum and running with it, flying with it, doing well with it. They get good grades. These strategies are good for all teachers. And so for me in my school district, when I provide the trainings, a lot of these workshops, I don't invite just the cluster teachers. I invite every single teacher in the district. And as a matter of fact, most of my trainings, and I provide them weekly, and we talked about doing some of those with your teachers throughout the fall. But I want to invite everybody because those strategies, a lot of them work very, very well with these smart students who are not as identified as gifted. So I want to make sure that they're getting access to the same type of training and utilizing some of these same strategies. And when we expand it in your school, there'll be more and more of that training available so that more students will be impacted by them. But with the gifted cluster teachers, we know that those students are learning outside of the norm. So we have to do something very different with them. And that is why that's why gifted education exists, because we want to make sure that all children are advancing appropriately.
Thank you for that. Someone asked if clustering was going to happen across K-12, and we're concentrating these efforts within the elementary. Our middle school already has an honors program and high school is self-select. And so this does speak more so towards elementary, just to clarify. Teachers are currently undergoing training now. That has been mentioned. There was a question just to be clear about the level of training teachers are receiving and will they be equipped for this model once school starts. And our teachers are currently immersed in high ability training throughout the summer. They are planning together. They are working with instructional coaches. Their administrators are a part of these experiences as well. And so we are working to ensure that our teachers are equipped and that learning is not just happening in the summer, it's happening throughout the school year. There are other things that will be occurring in partnership with Dr. Brulles' consultation. We will also be a part of some IDOE related training, as well as have a high ability coach join us on a district level to support teachers as well through this model. Can you speak, Dr. Brulles, to the clustering and the questions around would it cause regression, when you have more of an inclusive environment that has different ranges?
Well, in my experience, I have never seen that. I have not seen that because with self-contained around programs or classes around the country, they all look very, very different from each other. And there's not always a consistent training and professional learning opportunities. Well, what we are providing here with Cluster is very targeted toward how gifted students learn. And like all of those things that I talked about, the flexible learning groups where they compact curriculum and go deeper into the higher level questioning, all of those things, those are the fundamentals of how gifted students are going to respond to instruction at appropriate pace for themselves. So what I do in my district, I do track the achievement in the cluster classes, and I do benchmark assessments and a lot of a lot of pre and post testing to make sure that the students are making that appropriate growth. And if you are tracking that achievement, which I strongly encourage the district to do, then you can document some of that growth that as I have seen in others who are involved in this model. I'm not sure if that answers the question completely, but I have not seen a regression in academic growth with students in my experience of doing this. And I've worked with groups and school districts all around the country. I'm on the board of National Association for Gifted Children. I was the school district rep for 6 years. So I've had a lot of experience with this, helping districts transition from a pull-out to cluster or a lot of, and that just it doesn't bear out what that concern in my experience.
And to clarify, I will reiterate again that only Allisonville 3rd and 4th grade classes are clustering, as well as Crooked Creek 3rd grade. So no other school or grade level at this point is clustering unless you had a school that maintains students, as families may have opted out of the programming, and we still have to service students who identify. And so, for example, with 4th grade in Allisonville, you had over 36 students or so who qualified. And so they are going to divide those into 2 cluster classes in order to service those students. And so I also read questions about numbers in particular, and that depends on the building. It depends on the amount of students who qualified. But ideally, per research, and Dr. Brulles, you can always jump in as well, within your book, you can cluster, as many as or less as 4 students, within a classroom together. But we do have within Washington Township cluster sizes that have more, than 4 students to a class.
And I've had that over the years as well. It really depends on, like you said, how many students are identified at each grade level. And so I like to call this structured autonomy. Here's a structure in place, and the schools have the autonomy to make it work according to their population and their demographics, and all of that is involved at the principal level a lot of times. But I would agree that if the number of gifted students gets so high, we just add another cluster class and train more teachers.
And within our district, we have certainly more than 12, I would say, students who are identified within those clustered classrooms. And then there's a question about the composition. Dr. Brulles, do you then have students who are high average, below average? Who fills the rest of that clustering space once you have students identified?
So what we want to do is, remember that bell curve I showed you? We want to make sure that the students on the low end of that bell curve are not with the gifted students. And people might say that's elitist, but what it really does, it's empowering the teacher to be able to design lessons for those advanced learners without also working with the struggling students. Because there's a very wide range of abilities in every single classroom. And I anticipate that it's going to be even more profound next year because of COVID and the different learning experiences families have participated in. Some had a lot of support, students had very little support. So grouping the students and flexible grouping within those classrooms, I think is going to be all the more important to teach teachers how to figure out where each student is, what they need, and have small groups of kids working together on whatever level of work that they need. And that's the big emphasis on the instruction for your district.
Looking through questions, we've talked about teacher trainings. Will all classes move clustering? We've talked about that within the presentation. Again, we're going to monitor data and let that be our guide as well as research. It does not mean that all will move into clustering. However, the goal is to have services at all sites throughout our township. Any resources that you could think of off the top of your head, Dr. Brulles, besides, of course, the Clustering Handbook, which I happen to have. I don't think you can see. Here we go. Any other resources that you could think of to provide families who want to learn more?
The best resource that I can tell you is from Dr. Jim Webb, A Parent's Guide to Gifted Children. It is fantastic. It's broken down into a lot of the academics, but a lot of just the understanding how gifted children learn, how to support some of those needs, how to interact with schools and teachers, and how to work as a partnership. I had a lot of conversations with principals today about the importance of building these partnerships with the parents, and I saw there was a mention, another note here. But yeah, that would probably be the ideal, the best one that I would say. Just it's from Great Potential Press, and if you just Google it, look on Amazon, and Dr. James Webb, he's the founder of SENG, Supporting Emotional Needs of the Gifted, and so that would be the best resources all around, social emotional academic, for parents to take a look at first. And of course, if you want to learn a little bit more about the gifted cluster grouping model, the book that Dr. EBL just showed you also has information for parents so that you can better understand the process. Remembering that structural autonomy, this is the guide in the book, but it's going to be tweaked depending on your population and your numbers.
And I know we are at time, and I do want to communicate to those who are participating that we plan to take these questions that have not been answered today, and we'll certainly develop an FAQ that we will place on our website to answer some of those questions. I will tell you that within our handbook, because I've seen a lot of questions about honors courses and offerings, there is a lot of information that is already there that speaks to some of the questions that some are raising. And to also reiterate, as far as the clustering method, again, we are monitoring this. We are ensuring that we are implementing the practices with fidelity. And when it comes to grade level implementation, we only have the specific sites that were named. And so I'm still seeing some questions asking if Box Hill and other places have clustering, and the answer is no. And so I just want to be very clear about the specific schools that are engaging in these practices, and that teachers will have a lot of support, throughout the year, for this implementation model, and to make sure that we are devising and developing it with success. So I thank everyone for your participation today. As mentioned with the clustering method, there is a science, behind it. If your student is participating within that particular, model, where we do narrow the range in terms of abilities in order to differentiate. So I know that has been a common question I've seen within the chat and within the presentation. Dr. Brulles did mention that the range is narrowed in order to meet the needs of students. But again, we will take all of these questions and we'll help to develop an FAQ, and we'll make sure that that's accessible on our website. So again, we thank you for being here. Dr. Brulles, we thank you for partnering with us, on this journey, and for providing us, all of your research and your insights and expertise. And I value everyone's time this evening to learn more, and we will continue to help answer, questions, and feel free to schedule some time with me too if you'd like to learn more, or if you just have some general questions about your child specifically. Happy to help. All right, have a great evening, everyone.